tuned in to RBLR, the home of Tampa Bay's Reveler Sports.
Hello and good evening to everyone out there in Tampa Bay and beyond. This is James Knowles coming at you for the RBLR Sports Podcast. I am here tonight with Carlos to cover the Rowdies portion of our podcast. And Carlos, how are you doing this week? That is where we always start, so I got to ask.
Yeah, James, I'm doing great. Missed last week's episode because I was in the process of moving back up here to Washington, D.C., to Georgetown, where I'm starting my third year of undergraduate education. So now I'm all settled in. Lots of fun stuff coming up for me personally this semester. Georgetown soccer is back, and for me personally, that's just a great point of joy because it's so much fun to watch, and I know so many guys on the team. But with regards to the Rowdies, which we will be discussing obviously on this episode, my weekend has been fantastic. A little bit of a poetic result that we're going to jump into here and talk about in a little bit. So James, how about your day? How's your day going? How's your weekend been? What you been up to?
Yeah, my weekend was kind of busy. So I found out through one of my friends that we are going to do this thing for the World Cup. We are going to get a beer from every country that is qualified for the World Cup, and we're going to try and drink them on the day that, say, a team, let's say Argentina, if they were to get eliminated, whenever that is, then we would drink that one on that day. But it was a lot of travel all over Tampa, and we got roughly 16 of those. So that was part of my weekend. Nice. And then for the game, my fiance and I were all dressed. We were ready to go. We're about to walk out the door, and then this thunderstorm just opens up, downpour from the sky, and there is lightning overhead. Our power went out literally 3 times in 10 minutes because of lightning strikes. And we're looking at the radar. We're like, okay, are we going to be able to go? It looked pretty iffy, but we decided we'll make a go of it anyway. So we go to walk outside, and our whole street is flooded. And she and I cannot leave my house, so I did not actually get to attend the game. It was annoying in that sense, but I did get to watch it on my phone. My roommates had already called the TV for that night because I wasn't supposed to be there, so I had to watch it on my phone. But she and I did enjoy, obviously, the result, and I got to rewatch the game again today. So I have all my talking points down. I think we're all set for tonight's recording. But yeah, that was my weekend.
Beautiful. Sounds like a solid weekend, other than actually, not being able to get out to the game. But nonetheless, James, let's talk about this game. I had a great time watching it from up here in DC, and I don't know. It felt. I know Neil Collins, made a point to say that this result wasn't anything, like a revenge game or anything like that. But there was a little bit of satisfaction for me personally, even though, again, having been at that game and seeing that result play out last year, it was definitely a tough result to stomach. So there's a little bit of poetic justice for me, because on Saturday night, the Tampa Bay Rowdies got back to winning ways after a little bit of a 2-game slump with a 3-1 triumph over Orange County. Eureka and James, you guys both gave your predictions last week when I was away. Neither of you get full points, but both of you guys get a point for the correct victory predictions. We do have another home game this weekend, which we will preview a little later on in this episode. But before we do any of that, I just want to remind everybody taking a listen right now to quickly take out their phone. Maybe you got your laptop out and follow at RBLR Sports on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And please be sure to like and subscribe this podcast on all major podcast platforms, wherever you listen to your podcasts, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are, you'll find us there. And be sure to drop a nice little comment and say how good I sound on audio. Cool. With that, James, let's get into this review of the game. Do you want to give us a quick summary of how everything went here?
Absolutely. Let's go through that before we jump into the questions and analysis, so we have a general idea what we're talking about. The starting 11, where we always get going, that was with CJ Cochran in net, Lawrence Wyke, Robert Castellanos, and Aaron Gein at the back, Connor Antley, Lewis Hilton, and Jan Ecker in midfield, with Sebastian Dalgard, I should say, also in midfield. Leo Fernandez and Jake LaCava were in front of them, with Sebastian Guenzotti acting as the out-and-out striker. So it was good to see him back. The Rowdies took a 2-0 lead in the first half and really seemed to be kicking butt then. I really liked the way the first half went. But it should be noted that it did not follow through all the way to the end of the game. The second half was very different and included a Jan Ecker red card, not something that anybody ever wants to see, of course, and a goal conceded before we were able very late in the game to restore a 2-goal lead and win 3-1. As you said, kind of poetic based on the result versus Orange County in the final of last season. Despite what the coaches and everyone said in terms of whether or not they were thinking about the game as they played it, it still played out to a 3-1 result. And I know that a lot of fans had that in their heads. So yeah, it was very good, but it was still a game of two halves. And we have a lot to talk about, in terms of how it turned out that way. So Carlos, let's just jump right into these questions and analysis now, and let's dig deeper into that game of two halves. It's a common phrase in soccer. It's a bit of a cliche at this point, but it really did work out that way. How did we see each half take place? What did you see go on in that period?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Obviously, I think, there was really no, I don't know, I guess if you're in the stadium, if you're watching the game and you're a Rowdies fan, you go up 2-0 with the flow of the game and how we're playing, and kind of generally there was a lack of chances for Orange County in the first half. Given all those factors, I mean, going into the second half, you're feeling really good. I was almost about ready to, turn off my phone and get back to some, classwork I have going on after the first week of class. But obviously that red card from Jan Ecker, I guess the second yellow, wasn't a direct red card, was the reason that, we can characterize this game as a game of two halves. Because honestly, like before that red card, Orange County wasn't really doing a ton. It was 2-0. We were fully in control. And then Iloski, I think is how you pronounce his name, just nailed a beautiful, beautiful free kick to make it 2-1. So not only did we go down a player, but we also conceded that free kick goal in a span of like 2 minutes. So that obviously changes the game, because now we're down a player, and, when you're in that situation, you're probably going to try and sit back and defend that lead. And that's what we did, obviously. I mean, it's not really Neil Collins' preferred choice, especially at home. It's not something you intentionally try to do, but when you're down a player, that's going to happen in soccer. And obviously you look at the stats, and at the end of the game, Orange County SC actually had a higher XG, expected goals statistic than we did, which honestly I did not expect, despite the second half being so tilted in their favor. And honestly, I mean, that's really it. That's how the game, that's the reason why it was a game of two halves, was because of that 2 minute span where everything changed. And I want to give a special shout out here to the back line and the midfield, and Dion Harris, who obviously scored the third goal at the end of the game. But the back line, Dion Harris, and even Etu to a certain extent when he came in in the last 10 minutes of the game, Scarlett as well when he came in as a sub. Everybody very what's the word? I guess it was one of those wins where you just, the cliche is it was a very gritty win. And those happen sometimes. You're going to need those performances, because not every game is going to be a stellar offensive performance. Something's going to go wrong, like a red card too early on in the game. And these guys showed grit. They showed serious character. It was something I was very worried about because of how much time Orange County was playing up a man. I mean, I really wanted this win for the obvious reason of having lost to these guys in the final last year, but also because we want to get out of this little 2-game slump and make sure it doesn't extend into more games. So overall, I'm going to give it a really solid rating of a performance, especially with a special mention to the back line, special mention to Robert Castellanos, who started his first game of the season since the first game of the season. So yeah, just a lot of grit in the second half, whereas in the first half, you just saw more of a typical Rowdies performance this year, where we're controlling the game, creating a lot of chances. But again, that all changed after that red card.
Yeah, obviously that was a pivotal moment. I don't know how much more pivotal you can get when,
Right.
unfortunately, you go down a man and they score the second later because it was from the free kick. And by the way, I mean, I guess we picked the wrong Iloski to be the threat in this past game, but Brian Iloski did pick out an amazing free kick for that. But let's not spend too much time, celebrating anything that Orange County did in this past game. I think that it really did get dicey when we went down a man, and the thing that really helps kind of drive that point home is when you look at the substitutions that we made over the course of the game, and I'll just run through those again really quickly here. Dayon Harris came on for Sebastian Dalgard. That was right before the red card, so that didn't actually necessarily be impacted by Jan Ecker's red card. But then Jordan Scarlett came on roughly 10 minutes later for Sebastian Guenzati. So obviously you're taking off a striker, you're bringing on a center back. And the back line then went to Hunterly as a right back, Jordan Scarlett and Robert Castellanos as the two center backs, Aaron Guillen as the left back. And then Lawrence White stepped up into the midfield to fill in where Jan Ecker was. Then for the last couple minutes, when Etu came on, he stepped into the midfield where Lawrence White was. Lawrence White actually stepped out to the right wing back spot. I guess it would be the right wing spot in that moment, but we weren't doing a lot of attacking. And then the way that Dayon Harris played was actually he was the highest man on the field. So obviously that's a very defensive setup, but it did allow for Dayon Harris to exploit his speed, and it worked out with the goal, of course. The one thing that I will say, it does, as you already mentioned, the red card did impact the way the Rowdies played, but it impacted us almost more than I might have expected because, we still are a team that thrives on pressing our opponents when they have the ball. And, that was just non-existent in the second half. And we were, essentially sitting back, allowing OC to build up and kind of taking the hits and absorbing them as best we could. It got really hairy for a little bit before Dayon Harris scored his goal. And I don't know if you remember these two chances in quick succession there, Carlos, but there was a cross that OC put in. It was kind of headed out, but not really. And then, it went back and forth in the box until it landed at the edge of our 6-yard box. The guy took it on the half volley, and luckily he put it wide of CJ Cochran's net, but into the side netting there. So that was like the closest they got. And they also had another pretty good chance 2 minutes after that. But luckily it was in the 89th minute that Dayon Harris kind of put the game away and said, it doesn't matter what you guys do, OC. It's already over. So that was good because, we had all of the really positive play in the first half, but it was just so desperately nullified by the fact that we were down a man. And I guess at that point, Neil Collins just wanted to shut up shop.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really like that point you made of mentioning Dayon's role. Like you said, I mean, he came in before the red card, so it wasn't really part of the plan for him to come into this 10-person system and play as that striker role. But we've seen him before slot into that position as kind of like the main forward. Towards the end of games, I think in this game in particular, he had to do that a little earlier than he would have liked.
Right.
But I mean, I do want to give him a lot of credit. And we'll get into our man of the match picks later. So I'm going to kind of spoil it and say that Dayon's not my man of the match, but he's an honorary mention for me because his role up there as kind of like that really speedy, great dribbler, just constant threat despite only being a 10-man lineup. You could tell throughout the second half kept at least the Orange County back line on their heels a bit. So as to, I guess, prevent them all from just constantly being in our half, like the whole half. It wasn't like we were literally in our own box for 40 minutes or something like that. Like Dayon's presence up there was enough just by itself without him even touching the ball to keep like their center backs a bit grounded. Even some of like their center midfielders were a little hesitant, or maybe it was the coach's tactics, probably a little hesitant to push up his center midfielders all the way. And then obviously he did score that goal at the end. So stats wise, it was a great performance. But just looking at like his positioning and his presence out there, it played a huge role that doesn't show up in the stat sheet.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is a good way to describe the way that the game went. Let's break it down a little bit farther into individual moments and players here. So before we get to the red card, let's focus on some of the good things that happened in the first half here. So Sebastian Guinzotti almost got himself on the score sheet. I know, Carlos, you might have a bone to pick with that statement, but what does this mean for the team? What does this mean for him and the way that we played? So if you'll allow me really quickly, I just want to break down a little bit where Sebastian Guinzotti was kind of playing here, because it's not actually what he was playing last season when he was scoring all of his goals. Sebastian Guinzotti was one of the 3 players up top, but he was around Steven Dos Santos, who was our central man who was trying to receive the ball with his back to net, usually a player on his back as well. Then he would lay it off and he would help set up the play. Big Duba using his giant body and his giant frame to keep possession for our team and then move us along. So Sebastian Guinzotti was playing in the central role, but obviously he doesn't have the same size as Steven Dos Santos, so he doesn't play the same game when he's in that role. Right. It was definitely the case that when he was up there, Seba was using more so his speed and his guile to kind of get in between the center backs and make them think and ultimately cause them to step into the wrong places. So Albi Skendi and Michael Orozco were the 2 players back there. Now, Michael Orozco has, I believe, over 30 caps for the U.S. national team, but at this point in his career, he's just an older guy and he's going to be a lot slower. So Sebastian Guinzotti used that to his advantage. And then Albi Skendi, that guy is 6'6", and I don't know how else to describe him other than kind of lumbering. It was a little bit like Sebastian Guinzotti was running away from Frankenstein at times, or Frankenstein's monster for all our literary listeners. But it was just good to see that he was able to use his advantages as they were on the field and put that into play so that Orange County couldn't account for what he was going to do. And we also took advantage of the inexperience of the 2 fullbacks. So with all of that now being said, let's move into the question that I started with here. Carlos, how do you see it going forward for Sebastian Guinzotti with him effectively getting himself on the score sheet, even if the stats won't say so?
Yeah, so for anybody that knows me, you probably know how much I freaking love Sebastian Guinzotti. Like, I think he's one of the biggest legends for this club in the modern era and everything. Like, I mean, so obviously that goal that he kind of sort of scored is going to go down as an own goal. And it has gone down as an own goal. But I think for his, this sort of slump he's been on most of the season here, I feel like just you could see how the guys celebrated after the ball.
Oh, it meant so much.
Yeah, you could see it on his face, but I think what's more telling is how you could see it on the rest of the team's face, how much that goal meant to this team. I mean, obviously to Sebastian Guinzotti, but to the team, like you could see it on his teammates' face. It was really, really powerful just as a sort of sporting moment to see how much like these guys care for their captain, for one of the legends of the club here. And I think that attitude, I mean, that has to mean something. That has to carry over a little bit into this next game. Whether he plays as a starter or not, you can just kind of, it feels like that energy is going to carry over, and he's kind of gotten back into that, beginning to get back into the swing of things, I guess. Yeah, because as you mentioned, I mean, he was utilized, like just apart from, that goal that he kind of sort of scored, like he played a great game. When he was in there, he was causing a lot of problems. He missed one really clear opportunity that I can remember. That definitely should have been buried. But again, I mean, he's been in this slump. So it's almost sad to say, but it wasn't like super surprising to see him like that ball go a little wide just with the form he's been in. But again, later on, he put that goal into the net with a little bit of an assist from the Orange County player. And yeah, like I said, it meant a lot to the team. It meant a lot to him. It's not going to go down as like the record goal or anything like that. But I really, really feel like it's going to be a bit of a turning point for his performance on the field, and I hope he can officially get on the score sheet this upcoming weekend in the game that we're going to preview. Just because, again, you can tell how much it meant, and it just feels like the guys are going to count it as the goal that'll get him out of that slump, even if it doesn't really count on the stat sheet.
Right. Yeah, I like to look at it in similar terms to what I was describing with, like, what he brings to the field in not a new role. I don't want to say that. He's played, for the Rowdies for so long. He's played in nearly every position except, center back and goalkeeper at some point. But
Sure.
he's just it's just good to see him offer this option, because we hadn't really seen him excel too much at doing that this year. Where Steven Dos Santos was on the bench this game, it might have been a difficult game for him to get involved, considering the two players that he would have been up against. Again, Michael Orozco and Albie Skendi. He probably matches up pretty well for those two. But the way that we saw it break down in this game, our attacks were, of a very different stripe to what they would be if we had Steven Dos Santos out there, because we had a lot. We had those two center backs, but we also had two very inexperienced fullbacks who often got themselves into the wrong position to follow up defensively. So, and Carlos, correct me if I'm wrong on here, but what I saw for the first half was a lot of the Rowdies trying to suck OC's defense out a little bit, and then, just a little dink chip over the ball, over that back line, put the ball into the space between them and the goalkeeper, and let one of us run onto it, because we had a lot more speed than Michael Orozco or Albie Skendi. Jake LaCava often did this. Leo Fernandez wasn't as much the chaser as he was the guy often putting that little chip in over their defense. Connor Antley, I think, got on one because he and Lawrence White were doing this very good switching for a lot of the game. I like to see that. Lawrence White also got on a couple of them, but it was Sebastian Guenzati who chased down a lot of them, the vast majority of them, and put himself into the position to do this, where he could receive the ball on one side and then continue the play, much like Steven Dos Santos would, but in a different way because of their different skill sets and their different body types. So I like that there is this option. It probably won't work every game, just like Steven Dos Santos. His body won't work every game. I've described why this game might have been better for Sebastian Guenzati. And, the game coming up for similar reasons might be better for Steven Dos Santos, but we'll have to break that down a little more. So, it's just, again, all of these things, having the ability to change a game based on who you bring in, and allowing the team to be able to play different styles, whether that means these little chip balls dinked over the back line, or, just through the defenders. It's a through ball for somebody to run onto, or if you're going to play it into the feet of somebody like Steven Dos Santos or Kyle Gregg, then if we can continue to build up the play, no matter who we bring in, then that's just a great sign for the team overall. And I really like that. I think that means that Sebastian Guenzati is probably in line for more playing time, and more playing time most likely means more goals. And we're all hoping for that, as you said.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point too about kind of the offensive approach of, I've mentioned this in the past about, especially in reference to the Louisville game a couple of weeks ago, about how it seems like we're kind of over reliant at times on this kind of just play it down the wing and throw in crosses until somebody gets on the end of it. In this game, Steven Dos Santos wasn't starting, so that wasn't really the plan of attack in the same way.
Exactly.
Like you mentioned, I mean, it's more of like these kind of dinked balls in, working the ball around, kind of draw their back line out, especially with their big guys on the back line for Orange County. And it was really, really promising to see the success that came from that, with those 2 goals in the first half, and off like other good chances that came in the first half, of which there was a decent amount. It was really promising as a fan to be able to see that, there's a word for, like, a noun for dynamic,
Dynamism.
Dynamism, is that a word? We'll say it is for now. I mean, you know what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
being able to kind of shift that in this particular game, and seeing Neil Collins's, I guess, a willingness to switch that tactic, depending on the opponent, was very promising. And I mean, like you said, I hope it's something that leads to maybe more goals and more playing time for Sebastian Fanzati, depending on the opponent. But again, like you said, it's also going to have to depend on the opponent, and maybe Steven Dos Santos is going to be a better matchup for a different game. Yeah, but just on a broad general note, seeing that different approach, I guess more in the first half and the second half, was fun to watch, first of all. But again, promising for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's move on now to another player who had a big role in this game, and we will move into the second half here. How did we feel about both the Jan Ecker red card, obviously, and the goal which followed? So I will come out and say on the first yellow card that he received, I do believe that it was justified. And I do believe that the second card was also a justified card. So in effect, I'm agreeing that, he did deserve a red card if, he had both of those yellows. So I think that it was, I don't want to say that it was a stupid foul to take. I think that what was stupid was when the ball came into Jan Ekra, it was actually Orange County's pressing that was really helping them at the beginning of the first half or the second half. And that's where they put him under pressure. Jan Ecker is usually such a good player at getting out of those positions too. It was honestly really weird to see that he was unable to, squirt. What am I trying to say? Squirt out of that, I guess. But yeah, he did not break away from the player like we're so used to seeing. And unfortunately, that means that he had to tackle him because the other player won the ball at the top of our box and effectively would have had a free shot on CJ Cochran. So he did have to, take the foul, but where he failed, unfortunately, beforehand was at keeping possession. So I think that was, again, very uncharacteristic, and I'm surprised that it worked out that way. But if you're going to take that, then I suppose, that's probably better than letting him have the shot. Unfortunately, the shot that followed on the free kick obviously was their goal, and it was extremely well taken, as I've already said. But I think that after that, we've already discussed a little bit how the dynamics of the game changed entirely. And what did you feel about Jan Ecker's performance overall? I think that he was doing pretty well for most of the game. And then, it was I would say more so it was one really bad mistake, because I don't think that the first one, while it was a yellow, probably wasn't as heinous or anything like that.
Yeah. I will say that it's kind of hard for me to put all the blame on Jan Ekra for that red card as well. Because, I mean, like you said, Orange County was doing a very, very good job of pressing high. And looking back at the replay, I want to put a little bit of blame on CJ Cochran as well. But even then, in that case, like, he was under so much pressure that he didn't really have time to just clear the ball super well. But giving the ball to Ekra in that situation with how many guys were around him and seeing, I'm forgetting who took the ball away from him, but the Orange County player who was essentially like right on top of him as soon as that pass was made.
It was just Pedersen in their midfield.
Sure. Yeah. It was not putting Ekra in a position to succeed, to say the least.
Absolutely.
So yeah, again, it's hard for me to put all the blame on Ekra. It's not hard for me to put all the blame on Cochran. But you can kind of credit Orange County, again, like you said, with putting up a good press, putting us in trouble. Yeah, I mean, his performance in the first half was fine. Like, it was an Ekra performance. It was solid. It was one of the performances where he's doing well because you don't like notice him that much. He's just kind of controlling the midfield with Hilton. Yeah, that pair in the midfield is just always solid. But like you said, I'm not going to knock his performance down super low just because of that one mistake. Maybe you don't foul him there. Maybe you let him go and you get the shot off. But in that situation, it's such like a split-second decision that there's not really a right choice, I think. So he picked his choice, and that's what happened. So, yeah. You can't even – it feels hard to knock him very much in that situation.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from there. I think that pointing out CJ Cochran playing the ball into him is probably also valid because, uh, effectively you are responsible when you're in that position, just like you are in any other position. If you're going to make a pass, you got to decide whether or not the pass that you're making is a worthy pass. And,
Right.
you're going to be under pressure for sure. A goalkeeper is not used to having somebody breathing down his neck like maybe a Lewis Hilton is in the midfield, but you do have to make that decision as well. And, maybe sometimes, and there are certain coaches around the world who are going to tell you, I never want you to hit it long. And it might be someone like Eric Ten Hag, who then has his team give up several goals against Brentford. But I don't assume that Neil Collins is necessarily that dogmatic. I would probably say that Neil Collins is one of the guys who's like, I would like you to play it out of the back if you can, but
Yeah.
if you need to, hoof it long, get rid of it, and don't even
Right.
mess around when we're in that situation. So I can't say for sure what he would have told them when they got back into the locker room without having been there. So I will just continue to speculate and say that it comes down to both players, a certain amount of percent guilt. And we'll leave it up to the soccer gods to determine exactly what those percentages are. But let's move on to a larger look at individual players than just these two, and say, Carlos, there were obviously a lot of other important battles across the field. We've gone through the switches in formation based on how we saw the team start to play when they were down a man, and how they
Yeah.
had to fill in for Jan Ekra's position being open in the midfield. So what did you see in those battles across the field, and how did the Rowdies players handle those? Who came out on top? All of that stuff. What did you think about that?
Yeah. Like you said, I mean, there's kind of a lot of battles is a fun word. I like to say battles on the field, to keep an eye out on. I think obviously their star player is the other Alaski, which confused me a lot, by the way,
Yeah.
watching this game. In
Yeah,
saying,
that's fair.
in saying Alaski's name earlier, I actually thought I was referring to Milan Alaski. Turns out it was the other Alaski, Brian Alaski. But Milan Alaski, or Milan Alaski, versus like our back line was kind of, I guess, kind of like the headline matchup in my head going into this game. Obviously, this guy's kind of up there as one of the MVPs in the USL right now. Very much a competitor for the Golden Boot and whatnot. He's a guy that, kind of like Gonzati last season, really knows where to be, kind of putting himself in the right position. Great dribbling. But with the exception of the second half, where they were really controlling the ball, and I would say even in the second half, I feel like our defense and our kind of center midfielders as well did a really great job of preventing the ball from even getting to him too much. And when it did, I don't really recall a situation where he was like in a very, very dangerous spot to put the ball away. I think that was the biggest matchup, and the one that, tilted the game most in our favor at the end of the day, was being able to shut him down and prevent him from getting on the score sheet. The other fun, I guess, battle that sticks out in my head, that wasn't something I was thinking about before I saw the game, but the one that, I guess the highlight that sticks in my head was the first goal, and kind of the somewhat comedic timing of the camera, like the sideline camera zoom in, where the camera switches at like field level, and out of nowhere you see Connor Antley just body this poor man Villanueva
Oh, he
off the
did.
ball. Like, Villanueva is just on the floor looking for a foul, but he's just 50 yards away from the ball because Connor Antley just threw him across the field. Like, I don't know, that was a fun. I'm not going to call that like a battle that we were watching out for before the game started, but I think that's a great word to kind of characterize that moment.
Yeah.
And kind of the aggression there. But that moment where he picked up the ball, and by the way, just to comment on that goal, that interplay was just so beautiful. Like, Connor Antley quickly getting the ball off of Villanueva, dumping it off to Leo back to Antley, and then Antley back to Fernandez. There was only two players involved in that counterattack, just bing, 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 back and forth, and Leo Fernandez putting away. A really tough shot, which I think might have been accidental. But if you ask him, he won't say that
Right.
when he's kind of like sliding into the ball. But yeah, a great performance from Antley. So yeah, I think for me, the biggest headline was kind of like the backline performance for us versus their
I agree.
attack versus Olaski especially. But then again, I mean, we mentioned Guinzotti earlier. It's kind of like a subheading here. Guinzotti versus Orozco and Skendi especially. Just I liked how you characterized him earlier as kind of like this lumbering figure. Yeah, that was a great matchup as well for us tactically. And obviously it worked out in our favor. Am I missing any other battles across the field matchups that might have been key to this game, James?
Well, I think that the only other thing that there is to say is in the second half, Lewis Hilton was the only guy who stayed in the midfield throughout. Lawrence Wyke stepped into the midfield to play in Jan Ecker's role until Junior Etu came on, and then Lawrence Wyke played as the kind of, obviously very defensive, but out on the right wing because it was a 4-4-1 of sorts. But yeah, Lewis Hilton did very well in his role. And he was another one in the first half who was pinging those chips back and forth, and he was definitely finding our wingers, our wing backs, I should say, it was at that point. But yeah, I did like the way that he played. The way that you phrased it for the second half was to say that the whole of the back line was very important. And actually, that's probably the best way to put it. It was definitely parts where Antley was the top man. There were parts where Lawrence Wyke, who started on the back line, was the top man. Jordan Scarlett came in and he was very effective. Aaron Guillen did very well. I think Robert Castellanos had maybe one or two slips, but they weren't really slips. It was just that, when you're defending one-on-one, you can't literally block every shot that a guy has against you. But
Right.
he did very well at trying to get those blocks in. And he did, I think, get most of them. There was only one where he did not get to Sean Okoli quickly enough to shut down a cross that he got in. And this was that last play right before they scored that I was referring to from earlier, where Sean Okoli was up back to back or back to front, I should say, with Robert Castellanos, and Castellanos showed him outside so that he was farther away from goal. Obviously, Sean Okoli took him out there, and he took one extra step and swung it across before Castellanos could get in the way, and that's how it ended up at the back post where I think it was their left fullback who had come on for Villanueva. I think that he smacked it into the side of our goal. Luckily, not in the goal, of course, but that was the only really outstanding negative moment for Robert Castellanos. For him to come back in what is, again, I don't think it is for players. I think Neil Collins did a good enough job at tamping that out if, it was even in their heads ahead of the game, but it probably wasn't. They are professionals after all. It was still an emotionally charged game for him to come back and get a first start. And I think that he did very well for that. So, yeah, including the whole of the back line. Also, it should be noted, CJ Cochran did still make several very good saves. There were more than one time out there where he came up big because they had broken through our lines early in that second half. So I'm happy with everybody who was out there in the defensive side.
For sure. A lot of sorry, there's a lot of background noise. The bad thing about moving into college is that I have my roommates constantly yelling in the background playing we've been kind of obsessed with Wii Sports and Super Mario again on Wii. So that's the constant yelling in the background you hear.
Gotcha.
Apart from that, James, let me ask you again. I mean, we've talked about the sort of poetic nature of this result against Orange County, the 3-1 win. What does this win mean in terms of single game? We can isolate it to this specific matchup against Orange County, but maybe we want to broaden it. Does this win mean anything in terms of kind of the seasonal narrative, in your opinion?
So I think that obviously this game is very important, first and foremost, for getting us off a 2-game losing streak where we lost very important games to, really good opponents, 1-0 in a row. That's not great. Obviously, you want to get yourself back on a positive note, and to do so against the team that kind of surprised everyone to win the league last year. I think that is extra nice. again, I really don't think that the players did have that in their heads that much. Neil Collins definitely pointed out a couple of times on the pregame press conference that, that was not on their head, and that was not a part of their mindset going into this game. And I do believe that, but it will probably be a little bit of a relief when the game is over and you're like, yeah, we knew we could beat that team. But of course, I mean, Orange County was a surprise package last season. They were doing very poorly to start out, and then they came on in the second half of the season and they started winning and winning and winning, and they went all the way through the playoffs. So it's just a kind of a fluke thing. I think that the Rowdies players who were there are still going to want to be able to say that we beat this team, even as Neil Collins said in the post-game press conference, the hurt from losing that final game will never go away, even if they win the championship this year. And I do believe that as well. In terms of what this game means for this season, because I think that that's the most that they're going to look at it. They're going to look at it, what it means for this specific season and not 2021. They got themselves out of a slump, but they also did so in a pretty good way. The first half, after 2 games where you and I and Eureka were all looking at each other like, where's the intensity? Where's the Rowdies team that we're used to seeing? It was 4 halves in a row of that. And then they come out the first half of this past game and they are absolutely dominating. And they are playing all of this very nice football, all of these lovely little chips that we've been talking about. And this is something that, we're not necessarily talking about every week either. So I think that helps even more. Then you get into the second half and it changes drastically just very quickly because of the red card, and they have to play a different way, but they're still able to scrape themselves out a win and ultimately get another goal, leave 3-1 winners. That all of that is going to mean a lot. They are a capable team, not only when they are, on the front foot, but also when they are on the back foot. They can defend and get you on the counter. And I think that both of those facts will really boost the Rowdies players' confidence. Hopefully, as we go through this, remainder of the season, there's not a lot left. So we're going to have to see, obviously, how it plays out. But I'm very positive on it.
Yeah. No, I think we mentioned this before, and I think you bring it up again because it's super important. Was kind of getting out of this little slump. It's hard to call something like a losing streak when it's only 2 games. But again, they were 2 very important games against 2 very good teams. Especially the Louisville game had, kind of a lot of implications for how the Eastern Conference could play out. So it was really good just to get back on the winning ways, I guess. But again, I think, especially having been someone that was at the final last year, kind of how devastating that game was for me. I was just kind of like in shock during the game. I was like, there's no way. With how well everything was going, like the atmosphere was still one of the best atmospheres I've ever seen since having started going to Rowdies games. And then to have that result go that way was brutal. So watching that game play out here from DC on my TV, and seeing it go our way, 3-1 result, gave me just, I don't know, it's hard to describe, kind of the little feeling in my brain or in my heart, whatever it was, like just a little bit of satisfaction, a little bit of contentment, like, okay, fine, that's behind us. Let's try and win a championship again this season. It felt like getting a little bit of a monkey off of my own personal shoulder, I guess. But who knows? Maybe a little bit for the Rowdies and the team itself. Obviously, they're not going to mention that. But I'm sure, like, especially for the guys, for most of the guys, since most of the team was here last season, it does have to feel. You have to feel something like after that result. So I don't know. For me personally, it felt good a little bit, and I'm sure for them it did as well. But I know they're not going to say that ever publicly.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that will do it for our questions and our analysis. I think the one last thing here is for us to name our man of the match, obviously. And I will go off first, if that's okay with you, Carlos. I am going to choose somebody who was getting his first start in a long time and still marshaled the back line very well, despite tough circumstances. So I am taking Robert Castellanos for all that it meant for him to be back on this team. I think that he did a very good job in his defensive role, both in the first half and in the second half, under very different circumstances. And I think that he did. I think that he did so also in a pressurized game, because obviously we've discussed how the Rowdies wanted to get back to winning ways after a rough little patch of 2 games, as much as we can call that a rough patch. I think that all of that means that Robert Castellanos is going to be a very important player throughout the stretch of this season, as long as there are no further injuries, and that is why he is my man of the match.
Yeah, James. There's a lot of players I want to mention, especially with how gritty the performance was. I think the whole team deserves a shout out. The subs that came in, Dale Harris, I mentioned explicitly earlier as sort of an honorable mention for me, just because of his presence and his huge role in the second half. Leo Fernandez obviously got a goal and pulled off a really beautiful assist on Dion Harris's goal to put the nail in the coffin. I mentioned
also, I just want to interrupt you really quickly. If Sebastian Guenzati's goal had been counted in his name, he would have had 2 assists.
Right, yeah. Leo. So I guess we'll give him a goal and 2 assists. That flop mob doesn't count. I'm looking at the stats, obviously. Antley, I mentioned earlier, having that just really fun moment. I guess not for Villanueva, but for everybody else watching. Just an absolute weight room moment. Sending Villanueva to the floor and getting a great assist on Leo's goal. But having said all of that, I'm going to totally agree with you, James. I mentioned Castellanos earlier as well. I feel like he played a very good game and was a huge role. Was a huge reason for I guess it wasn't a shutout, but the shutout, other than the free kick, I guess. Obviously nothing he could do about that. CJ Cochran, obviously it was a great shot. Cochran can't do anything about that either. But Castellanos was just a huge pivotal role in being able to shut down what, despite Orange County's kind of not great season, I guess I'd say that lightly because they're literally in last place in the Western Conference. It's still a very good team offensively. They have a lot of talent, and obviously Olaski is one of the best players in the league. And I think Castellanos was part of the main reason, a huge reason on the back line for why they couldn't get anything going, really, apart from that free kick. So I'll take Castellanos as my man of the match as well, James.
We didn't even plan that. I don't know how we ended up on the same guy when Leo Fernandez had what we're calling is a goal and 2 assists, but we still chose the same person, and it was somebody else.
Yeah. The only reason I'm not taking Leo as my man of the match is because they were, especially with the second half and his assist at the end of the game was just. It sounds like I'm minimizing it. It was a fantastic assist, but I'm looking at Castellanos' like just performance throughout the game, and his influence like throughout the game. Leo's kind of big moments were, especially at the end, it was kind of like a sporadic moment just to put the nail in the coffin. But again, I'm not minimizing that at all. It sounds like I'm saying it's just like an assist at the end of the game and like garbage time or whatever. Like that's not what I'm saying at all. But Castellanos' performance, like in his influence throughout the game, I think made him the most valuable player on the field in this particular game.
Yeah, I'm inclined to believe it.
Yeah, and with that being said, let's move on here. And before we get into the standings, James, I'm going to drop our shameless plug here for the RBLR Sports Shop. Liking and subscribing is free, but if you need some new threads, some new shirts, some new merchandise to support this podcast and support your local Tampa Bay sports teams, you can support us by heading over to shop.rblrsports.com and checking out all the fun designs that have been cooked up onto the website. A lot of really fun stuff on there. Lots of great merchandise. I definitely recommend checking it out. The link is also in the description of this podcast, wherever you're listening to us. You can use the promo code COYR. That's COYR for 10% off your purchase. So go on over, get something nice, and get a little discount while you're at it. And with that being said, James, do you want to take us through our standings update as we look at the updated table after this weekend?
Absolutely. So, yeah, there were several interesting results this past weekend beyond just ours. Lou City lost 1-0 to the Miami away in South Florida. So, that is obviously interesting. It impacts us and our hopes in the playoffs here. So, they are now stuck on 55 points. This also ended a 10-game unbeaten run for them. I am kind of shocked, but I'm not going to say anything but thank you to our ugly neighbors down in South Florida, I guess.
The
Memphis
Miami
and
baby.
now, yeah, exactly. Memphis and the Rowdies, obviously, we sit behind them on 51 points. Memphis have played one fewer game than us, unfortunately. But Birmingham sit behind us. They have 50 points from 27 games played. So we don't have to watch out as much for Birmingham, but Memphis does still have that game in hand over us, which impacts their ability to possibly keep ahead of us. Now, Pittsburgh, the Miami, and Detroit City all round out the Eastern Conference playoff spots. And let's move out to the West. Over there, San Antonio also dropped a game. However, they still clinched a playoff spot this past weekend. They sit on 57 points from 26 games played. And yeah, like I said, they are clinched in the playoffs. They will obviously likely continue to do very well out there, but what they have so far was enough to make sure that they will not drop any farther than, I believe it is seventh, because that is the last playoff spot. So moving farther down there, San Diego sit closest behind them with 52 points from 27 games played. Everyone else in the playoff spots has under 50 points, including Colorado Springs after San Diego, then Sacramento, New Mexico, El Paso, and upcoming opponents, Las Vegas. So, Carlos, if you could please take us into our preview of yet another home game this week versus the Las Vegas Lights.
Of course, James. Here we go, hopping into this preview of this upcoming game against Las Vegas on Saturday night. This upcoming Saturday, that is, at 7:30. The Tampa Bay Rowdies host Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Lights. Definitely encouraging everybody to be there to keep this good. I don't know, this good run of form going. Las Vegas has what James has written down here as a so-so recent record. Admittedly, James, I know like next to nothing about this Las Vegas Lights team, based other than what I see on FootMob and some of their lineups. They've drawn 2, they've lost 2, and they've won 1 of their last 5 games. Despite, I guess, looking at the table, and I have mentioned them earlier this season as sort of a kind of random team that's made a pretty big push from last year where they were in like last place. They are sitting 7th in the table despite this sort of not as good, last 5 games as they've had earlier in the season. Their last game was something to mention here in particular. It was a 5-0 home loss against RGV FC. Hopping into a little bit of a breakdown of some of their tactics, some of their performance. They do mostly play with 4 at the back. The Las Vegas lineup and formation are subject to a lot of change, though, because of the potential for different players being available. They still have an important relationship with LAFC from the MLS, despite James's trip last year. James, you want to talk a little bit about that before I move on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was out there for the last game of the season. It was in Las Vegas, and yeah, we got to play against. Well, they were a much different team at that point. They
Right.
were almost exclusively academy players for LAFC, and it was really good to go out there because it was the last game in the season, and I think because it was in Las Vegas, there was a pretty good Rowdies presence. We took up a good whole section of their stadium, which was also a converted baseball field. But yeah, I had a great time talking to the Las Vegas fans, and we hung out with them in their pregame tailgate for a little while, and then we set up our banners, they set up theirs at different sections of the field, and we came away winners in that game. I think that it was a little bit closer than a lot of us were expecting because of the team that they were at that point. But yeah,
Right.
it was still rare. It was still very good to see us go away and get the win. And that was obviously such a strong end to the season. So I'm hoping that we might be able to replicate that as well. It was something that I put out an article about at the time if you would like to see that. We obviously have it on the website. But beyond that, it was just good to kind of get a feel for this team. It
Right.
is, again, not the same team for all the reasons that you have gone into and will get into. But yeah, I think that, we do have a lot going for us against a team like Las Vegas.
Right. Right. The players that stand out here for Las Vegas are definitely Danny Trejo, who's their top scorer, and Cal Jennings, their second top scorer. I believe they're both on loan, right? Yeah, both on loan. Danny is on loan from LAFC. Cal Jennings on loan. Is he also from LAFC, James?
Cal Jennings is, yes, exactly.
Yeah. So another big top scorer that they've had marking a lot of goals for them has been Danny Masovsky, but he has moved on to Real Salt Lake. So that's at least one piece that we won't have to worry about this upcoming game. Definitely some talent on this team, though. So despite their recent not so good run of form, we're gonna have to keep an eye out for other players as well, such as Daniel Kynan, an Israeli international player, and Danielle Chrysostomo. I feel like I butchered that a little bit, but I'm going to go with that. So despite their spot in the playoffs, we were able to work this team last year in Las Vegas, like you said, James. In addition to that, though, with this being another home game, our second home game in a row after an important win, we should be looking to try to beat this team pretty convincingly, and I think we have the ability to do so. James, you want to give your predictions here, kind of break down how you think this game might go? Because again, I know very little about this Las Vegas team, but based on what I'm seeing, based on their lineups, based on their recent results, I think we can get a good result out of them.
I think that we can definitely get a good result here. It's also at home, as you already mentioned.
Right.
So that's going to be important for us because we definitely don't want to drop home points as we try to close out the season. Danny Trejo is going to be one player that we need to close down, as you said. But, he's not the only player who has a little bit of oomph, a little bit of danger to him. It also depends, as we've gone over, with who is actually going to be here from LAFC. It could be Danny Trejo. He might actually not even be there for all we know. Cal Jennings, I'm sure one of those two will be there between Trejo and Jennings. And we've got to also mention, a couple of their academy players, Christian Torres and Nathan Ordaz, these two guys from LAFC. They have the potential. They're, youth international players for different teams. Christian Torres he's from the LA area, but he has played for Mexico, and Nathan Ordaz can play for the US, Mexico, or El Salvador. I think he has at some point represented each of those teams in, some youth competition. But regardless of all that, these are guys who do have something in their arsenal that we need to keep an eye out for. Now, on the back line, Declan Kynan is another player that you mentioned. He is an older statesman of this team. He is, I think, 37. So he is maybe a guy that Sebastian Guenzati could have another day with, where we were looking at him versus Michael Orozco and taking advantage of his lack of speed as an older player. So I'm hoping that maybe something similar will play out there, but it should be noted that his frequent partners are not as old as he is himself. So Kynan will often be partnered with players like, I guess it was Mamadou Fall, but he is no longer there for even LAFC, so we can't say him. But Tony Leone is an academy player from LAFC. He will often step into the back line, and he's obviously going to have a bit more speed to him. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of lineup the Rowdies put out so that they can try to, take advantage of all of the different options that we have that they will probably not be able to handle. And I would like to see, if that's turns into Sebastian Guenzati, or if that turns into Steven Dos Santos, which one would work out better? Or maybe there's some combination of both with somebody sitting behind them. Maybe Jake LaCava is again asked to try and get in behind players with his speed if they, put these little through balls in like we saw against our past opponent here in the Orange County team. So yeah, there's a lot to consider, and I'm kind of interested, as I said, to see exactly what the team chooses to go with, because I don't have the best feel for Las Vegas this year, but I am just interested. Well, I want to see what their weak points are mostly, and this is a team that will definitely give up points if you get your attack coordinated enough. And I think that the Rowdies have been working on that in all sorts of different ways recently. So all of that being said, let's move into our predicts here. And if you want me to go first, Carlos, I will do that.
Go for it, James. Go for it.
Okay, so we won 3-1 this past game. I am saying against Las Vegas, we get a good 2-0 win, and we get another shutout after a little while.
Yeah, it's solid. Based on just Las Vegas's last performance, and looking at some of the stats, some of the recap here from the game against RGV. It's important, I think, to note that Rio Grande Valley is in 10th place in the Western Conference. It's not a team that stands out as a particularly strong offensive team, but they put up 5 goals against this Las Vegas team, which I wouldn't say that they're, based on what I'm seeing, is a team that has like a terrible defense or anything. But I think just with that run of form, and the fact that they're gonna have to travel all the way out here to Florida, that travel's difficult on the team, and I think we can put up a decent amount of goals on them. So I'm gonna go with a 3-1 win. I think we're gonna repeat this scoreline again. And I think this could be another game for Guinzati to officially get on the score sheet maybe this time, like you said. So I'll take a 3-1 win against this. I guess we can say a bit of a struggling Las Vegas team right now.
Yes. I think that is perfectly fair. So that will do it for our preview. Let's move into extra time here. And I want to say, first off, this is the first of the final 5 home matches this season. You got to see it. You got to go. Please show up like I tried to this past weekend. But my fiance and I, we are the ones who usually go to games together. So we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that we get to this game coming up against Las Vegas, when we were literally stopped because I didn't feel comfortable driving my car through the swamp that I apparently live in. But we are going to get out there and make sure that we can cheer on the boys in these last 5 home games, because once that's done, then obviously it's playoffs, and we don't know where we're going to be in the playoff picture at this point. We obviously want to be as high up the table as we can, and they're going to need all the fans that they can get to cheer them on and do that. So I am telling everybody, make sure you mark your calendars and you get out there for these last couple of home games. We got to make sure that we put the boys in the best position possible to succeed and get into the playoffs, where they can hopefully succeed a little further. Now, Carlos, if you could please, I think that there are some notes for our lone army.
For sure. I just wanted, quick extra time segment here. I want to make a note again of one of our loanees, Raiko Arezarena, again with a fantastic performance for Forward Madison FC. Who is having a little bit of trouble in their past games offensively. Can't seem to score a ton of goals. What they definitely have is a very, very strong goalie, complemented by a pretty decent back line. And Raiko Rosarena has had yet another shutout for Forward Madison FC. I think that'll be his 1-2. I believe that's his 4th shutout. Yes, that's his 4th shutout since having been loaned out to Forward Madison FC. So great to see for him. And, if he ends up back here in Tampa Bay, hopefully he brings that performance and that level of consistency back to the squad here for the Rowdies.
Yeah, I would obviously love to see that. I think that I was definitely high on Raiko Rosarena last year, despite the way that the final game of the season went. But, he obviously does need some more time and more playing time before he is probably ready to actually step up for the Rowdies and be our starting goalkeeper. This is a win-win scenario that he can get that and probably get some more shutouts along the way. We'll see how far Forward Madison goes in their respective playoffs search. I love that he is getting all this playing time, though.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, it's great to see the consistency he's doing up there. And again, I mean, this is the USL League One, the 3rd division. This is a very, very highly competitive, lots of talent division. Really good teams, really great competition for him. And again, stating the obvious, but the more playing time he has is going to be better for us, and obviously better for Madison as well. So it's a mutual win for everybody involved, James.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that will do it for us this week. I think that we covered a lot of ground, but one thing that I want to say, the final thing, get out to the game this weekend. Don't be like me and get stuck in your car. But thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Of course, we love when you do that. We are at RBLR Sports. If you would like to get at me specifically, I am also on Twitter at RBLR James K. You can use the hashtag AskRBLR, or you can probably get at Carlos if they would like to do that. Carlos, where could they?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at CarlosTPA10. That's where I tweet about literally everything. I was tweeting a lot about my Liga de Quito yesterday, who pulled off a very dramatic tie, a very dramatic draw away to, believe it or not, there's a team named Barcelona SC in Guayaquil, Ecuador, not to be confused with FC Barcelona, despite having almost identical logos. I don't know how they pulled that off without getting into some sort of legal trouble, but they're there, and I'm tweeting about that, as well as tweeting about the Rowdies pretty much every day. So come drop a follow, see my hot takes, see my cold takes, whatever's going on Twitter. I'm probably tweeting about because I spend way too much time on that bird app, James.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair for everybody. But yeah, if you do not, please also like and subscribe to our podcast. We are on Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, Apple and Google Podcasts. We are on all of these platforms and more. We're on YouTube, any major podcast platform. I'm sure you'll be able to find us there. Please do so. And for another home game coming up this weekend, come on, you Rowdies.
Thank you for tuning into this presentation by RBLR Sports. On your way out of the stadium, please remember to like and subscribe.